Welcome, everyone, to the first guest speaker event for the Intro to Credit Cards DeCal. So today, we have a very, very special speaker. On YouTube, his name is Ask Sebby, so please give him a warm welcome.
All right, so this is the first time I've done something like this, so we'll see how it goes. But in case you don't know who I am, I have a YouTube channel called Ask Sebby, about 250,000 subscribers, friends of a lot of the other personal finance YouTubers as well, mostly focused on personal finance, but in particular credit cards and how to do aspirational trips using points. Okay, so one of the big first questions is whether credit cards are evil. And I think it depends on who you ask. Some people are going to be very against it, and that's understandable. For me, I think it's more like alcohol or a knife. It depends on the person using it. So as long as you're responsible, you're doing the smart thing with it, then you're going to be in a good spot. The rationale I have for credit cards is that you're spending money anyways, so you might as well maximize the money you spend. You're not going to drive around extra, like you're not going to do extra laps around for fun because you're getting credit card points. Like that's just not how people work. Same with like rent. You're not going to choose to pay more rent because you're like, hey, I can get more points. It doesn't make sense. And like even for me right now, I still don't get the guac when I go to Chipotle. One thing I say a lot is YMMV, your mileage may vary, because it really does depend on your circumstances and what you're looking to do. Okay, moving to the next class. So with credit cards, you can kind of think of it as a few different parts. The first part is intro bonus, so kind of like signing up, getting points. Second part is the multiplier, so what you're getting from spending using the card. Third part is the utility that you have from the card. So intro bonuses are really interesting because in the first year, they're pretty much paying you to have the card. The assumption is that either you're going to keep a balance and basically make a lot of mistakes, or you end up being a customer that they're after. So for American Express Platinum, their average cardholder has a crazy high income and crazy high assets because that's their demo. Same thing with the Chase Sapphire Reserve. With intro bonuses, the few things you're kind of considering are the opportunity cost of applying. So there are a lot of cards. Does applying for one of them basically lock you out of another one? Whether there's a downgrade path to a no annual fee card if it doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of cards where you can sign up, get something like $500, $600. Second year, if you don't like it, just downgrade it to a no annual fee option. And some don't have that option. And then last one is downgrading some of the cards does lock you out of the subsequent bonus for that lower level card. Okay, so annual fees is another really big question that I get, especially from students. It's like, oh, why would I pay $95? Why pay anything at all when there's cards that have no fee? A lot of it is because the intro bonus pays for it. So for the Chase Sapphire Preferred, if you're getting 60,000 points to spend $4,000, the minimum value at absolute worst case is 1 cent per point. So that's still $600. Factor in that $95 fee and you're netting $505 for paying rent, doing whatever else you're doing with the card. And then if you want to do some aspirational stuff that we'll cover, then you can theoretically get 2 cents per point, if not substantially higher. So yeah, $4,000 is a lot of money, but there's a lot of mechanisms that you can do to pay that. So tuition being a big one, rent, there's a lot of platforms that allow you to do it for something like 2.9%. Taxes, especially once you start having like investment properties or like other businesses where you might not have had that withheld. So with the math, with the 505 net value that you're getting for 4,000, that's 12.6% return on your spend. I'll happily pay 2.9% every day. You're getting a free 10% for signing up for a card. Multipliers, I think people get caught up on this too, where you're like, oh, you're getting 4x back or 5x back. Why would you do that? Or like, how do you think about that? If you're someone who spends a ton of money, then that's when it matters a lot more. If you're someone spending $300 a month, like the difference between 2% and 5% is pretty immaterial. But if you're spending $3,000, $4,000 a month on food, then that changes quite a bit. Utility is the third part of the credit card thing. So are there any other benefits, whether it's hotel nights, status, airline perks like free checked bags, lounge access? A pretty good example would be the United card. If you fly out of SFO, you get free checked bags, and if you do 1 or 2 trips, that generally pays for itself. So if you go skiing in Denver, or yeah, if you just travel enough. Okay. So when you're thinking about cards, you're kind of thinking both in the short term and the long term. The short term is about the intro bonus and all of that. Long term is more about the utility. So for a lot of people, there's this optimal strategy or idea of how you think about applying for cards based off like opportunity cost and a lot of the other rules involved. So people generally start off of Chase due to something called 524, just because you can get locked out of their cards pretty easily. Second group is Barclays, Capital One, US Bank, because they tend to be a bit more selective and annoying with who they want to approve. So there's people I know who have, like, let's say $400,000 in income, who have a great credit score, but who can't get approved by Capital One because they're not seen as the target demo. They don't think they're going, Capital One doesn't think they're going to be profitable for them because they're not, because they pay off their cards in full, and Capital One's after people who they think might hold a balance. Citi and Bank of America is kind of interesting as well for that third phase. And American Express, I generally tell people to go for last, even though a lot of you probably have the gold card, just because they have something called the once in a lifetime rule, where you can only get that intro bonus for a card once, and that's pretty much it. And there are some like other background stuff, but for the most part, everything from 1 to 3, you can actually repeat every 2 to 4 years generally. So a lot of people will actually apply for something like the Chase Sapphire Preferred, get that bonus, and in 4 years' time, get another bonus for the same exact card. So yeah, you can see in the language as well. So Chase Sapphire Reserve, not available if you are either a current card holder or if you have had the card in the last 48 months. On a funny side note, if you do want to learn about cards, feel free to use the links on asksebby.com. So long term, you kind of want to see if you get value from the card. You can kind of think about it you can think about it like a math equation, right? So it's like, how much do you spend? What's the value of that? Are there any credits? Are there any other perks? And then annual fee, opportunity cost, is that positive or negative? Are you getting positive expected value from the card? A pretty good example that I like is hotel cards. So a lot of them end up giving you something like a certificate night for $95, give or take. So in effect, you're kind of paying $95 for this coupon. On one hand, it feels kind of dumb because like, why would you do that? On the other hand, if you travel even a moderate amount, you're probably going to find an opportunity to use that. So a good example would be Austin, which I travel to pretty frequently to just do work and stuff. Sometimes I'll crash at a friend's place, but that's sometimes awkward as well. If I use my free certificate night, then it's free. There's no taxes, nothing else. That's pretty much it. Same hotel, same exact dates, same room. If I had to pay out of pocket, that would be almost $400, and there's $70 in taxes. So almost $465, almost $500 for that certificate. So I'll happily pay $95 to buy that coupon. For lounges, you can kind of think of it like the same way. So how often do you fly? Do you fly with a companion? And also, how much do you drink? So a lot of people end up going to lounges and treating it like an open bar, because it kind of is. So if you have enough drinks, it just all works out. When you think about so one thing I don't really focus on a lot is cash back, because for me, it's kind of like checkers. It's relatively solved, where as long as you understand, like you're pretty much going for the intro bonus, you downgrade, upgrade, do whatever, then you pretty much just pick the cards that make the most sense, and that's fine. You can circle back to intro bonuses, perfect. But for the most part, I feel like for a lot of people, it's not that interesting. Travel is kind of solved, but it feels more like chess, where like robots can still play it, but people can also as well. So there are a lot of the same factors, but there's just more variables and moving parts. And there's also substantially more upside. It just feels more real in terms of the experience. So when you think about points, there's the 4 big banks that you can transfer out to. So Chase can transfer to Bonvoy and a bunch of their partners. These are basically the currencies you would want because they offer the most flexibility. You cannot transfer from Chase's partner back to Chase, for example. Oops. And then non-transferable ones would be airlines, hotels, United, anything like that, pretty much anything you can think of. You can transfer some of them, like Hilton allows you to transfer to other partners, but it's not really optimal, doesn't really make sense. Bonvoy is kind of interesting for some use cases, but I would say it's still not something I'd recommend. So the idea is that bank points, you can turn it into cash if you want to. You have that optionality, but it's not vice versa. You can't turn cash into these points, these bank points. You can't buy them. You can buy airline and hotel points, but it almost never makes sense unless there's a deal, unless you have a very specific use case. And the benefit of the points beyond the optionality is that there's substantially more upside. If you're someone who's getting a tech job after this or just staying in the valley, you're probably going to be getting pretty well compensated. And when you're thinking about a few $100, that doesn't move the needle for most people at least. Yeah, if your total, and then especially if you think your total comp is going up to like, oops. If you think your total, if you think your total comp is going to 500K in 3 to 5 years, then it doesn't really move the needle. $1,200 is nice, but it's not exciting. One interesting thing though is like, can you get outsized value from those points? Like, is there a way to get more than $1,200 from the same exact number of points? So one interesting thing is you can transfer it from Chase to Virgin Atlantic, and Virgin's partnered with ANA, so you can do bookings there. If you look at the Virgin award chart, you can do first class from the West Coast for 110,000 points round trip, or East Coast 120,000 points round trip. Looks pretty fun. Looks like a pretty good experience. That's what kind of a lot of the other influencers do. Either they get paid to be on these things or they use points because it gets them views and views is money, etc. So yeah, looks pretty fun. Otherwise, the only other way to do this is either being an influencer or being extraordinarily rich. So I've been on some of these flights. I've seen some of the other people and they're wearing like Pateks and like crazy watches and stuff. So there are rich people who pay for this. Okay, so how much does this cost? Oh, how much does this cost? $24,000. I don't want to pay $24,000. I think even if you make 500K, 24K is still an absurd amount. And the question I think you have to ask is, well, would you want to experience that versus something like $1,200 in cash? One other question is, well, is that the crazy, like, did I just find a randomly expensive flight, or am I doing something weird? It's like, no. That's actually the standard typical price for first class, and that's kind of what people actively pay. So given the choice, would you pick $1,200 or a $24,000 flight? I think it depends on you and your financial situation, but I think for a lot of people, the second one just is a lot more appealing and interesting, especially for that once in a lifetime experience. Availability is one thing that people ask a lot about. It's like, well, if everyone in this room tried to do it, isn't that going to be impossible? And yes and no. So they do try to sell these so they don't open them all up for availability. Generally, last minute or a year out tends to be the best way to book this. Just depends on the airline and you, because a lot of people do try to do this, but they just don't have that availability. But that's actually how I've seen a lot of students go to places like the Maldives or Bora Bora. And I'm like, how are you doing it? And say, oh, I'm paying my tuition. Okay, cool. So there are a few currencies, point currencies that people like that I would argue are generally bad just because the value is relatively fixed. So even though like I like flying Delta, I have status with them, people like Southwest, JetBlue, there's not really any upside. You know exactly what you're getting. So 100,000 points is going to be $1,400. There are some situational currencies like IHG, Emirates, Hilton that make sense, but generally are not as competitive. And then there's some that are better for upside. So Hyatt, ANA, Virgin Atlantic, Singapore, generally pretty good whether you're economy focused or you're into these aspirational stuff. For example, Hyatt is pretty good for road trips even. There's a lot of hotels we've been to that have costed 5,000 points that we're retailing for 150. So again, 5,000 points, if you cash that out, is 50 bucks. That's pretty much free value. So for a lot of people who fly, there's kind of like a checklist that they're after. It's kind of like what they want to achieve, the infinity stones, whatever you want to call it. So ANA first class, ANA business, Singapore suite, Singapore. Cathay Pacific first, Japan Airlines first. Kind of the same thing for Europe and Middle East. A lot of different options that are on people's just to-do list with points. Oops. Okay, so one of those that we ended up going on was Etihad First Class Apartments. Retail for this is some stupid amount. This whole seat is for one person. There's caviar, there's a whole bedside, there's a chair side, it's all you can drink. They have $700 bottles of alcohol. I've heard of some people just stealing the alcohol as well on their way out and they don't stop you. I didn't do that, but yeah, people do that. So it's a pretty cool experience to even do once. And then kind of a first world problem is that they actually eliminated the first class chefs. So there was a chef making the food for us. It wasn't all prepared. And then, yeah, people were outraged by this, even though it's absurd. So you can get an idea of like what the seat looks like. There's like a seat that you take off, you sit in, and then there's the bedside. It's pretty gigantic. And then if you look on the right, so like that actually connects to my partner's side, Mandy's side, where she had the same exact setup as well. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, bed over here, hallway of these suites, and there's also a bar in the air, which is pretty cool. Food was also pretty good. I pretty much used it as an excuse to eat for the most part. Yeah, I just ate a lot. Oops. There's also caviar, which tends to be a pretty common theme for these first class flights. Pretty cool overall. I like how you can actually sit with your partner and eat, which is just something that I've never, I don't know, like I didn't grow up rich. I grew up like pretty lower income. So being able to experience this is a pretty crazy thing to me. Like I knew I could fly, but I never knew that people flew like this. In case you're wondering, it's pretty much the top part of the plane, and then the back part of the top level is business class. Yeah, so these are pretty big planes. And then before boarding, they always have suites as well, or they have these lounges as well for first class and other things. Oops. So the only ones that I've ended up doing have been Cathay Pacific first. I had a bunch planned for 2020, but that didn't work out for obvious reasons. Oops. And then, yeah, for hotels, you kind of have the same philosophy where there's kind of this like grail list that people generally try to go down for each of the programs. A lot of them end up being Maldives and Bora Bora, given the nature of the cost and like the type of people who try to go there and the value that you typically get for points. These are the ones I've been to. I think hotels honestly offer a bit more value to me because you can have that experience of someone else. It's not just this like 8-hour flight with yourself because you don't need as many points. And also I just feel like it's more, you have more time to enjoy it versus it being rushed like a flight. And yeah, I think it's just one of those cool things where I didn't even know about the Maldives when I was growing up. I was like, oh, cool, people do this on Instagram, and I just went with points. Of the programs, I think Hilton offers a lot of the interesting value just because they have these certificate nights that you can pretty much use anywhere. So for one of the cards, you actually get a certificate every year just by holding the card. It's $450, but the card pays for itself because you get like basically $500 in credits, and they give you this night that you can use at the Water of Astoria, Maldives, which is like $2,500 a night. And the crazy thing too is that when you talk to a lot of these people at these places, a lot of them do pay out of pocket. They're like, we took out a loan, or this is our once in a lifetime trip. This is our honeymoon. We're never gonna travel like this again. And this is like $30,000. And then for a lot of the points people that I talk to, it's like, oh no, I do this once a year or like twice a year. Because if you can just pay $20,000 or $30,000 in tuition or rent to do the same exact trip and get it effectively for free or highly subsidized, then that makes sense. Even option 3, I'd rather buy like MacBooks and Rolexes and other like $30,000 in other stuff and still get that trip versus just paying the hotel the $30,000. Yeah, so if you have any experiences with trips like this, feel free to email me because I'm just trying to talk to more people about it, but otherwise open to questions and yeah, anything. Thank you.
with credit cards and just like taking out any type of credit? And then two, some of us already like I have like a Chase, I think unlimited or student freedom. What's like the next step for that? Like, what would you recommend us to do in terms of opening another line of credit?
Yeah, so the questions were, what are the biggest misconceptions and what are the next steps? I think misconceptions people have is that you don't really need credit. A lot of people still fall into that trap. And I think I've seen a lot of people get screwed when they're trying to rent places. I've had a friend come from the UK who didn't have any credit, and I think this was illegal as well, but the landlord made him pay the whole year up front. So like 30 G's. And I'm like, what the hell, right? And say, oh, you don't have credit, we don't want to rent to you. And that happens. So like the fact that the US is so credit centric, I think it's just one of those things where if you don't build it, you're putting yourself at a disadvantaged position. Like you can obviously be fine, but if you're using it responsibly, I think it's one of the easiest things to lever your strengths. Just be responsible, keep track of everything. And I think for most students, like if you're able to attend class and do things, you're probably fine. In terms of next steps for people, so if you have like the Freedom Unlimited or the student, generally something like the Chase Sapphire Preferred or Reserved would be my go-to, just because the bonus pays for itself, and then the Reserve you get lounge access, and it tends to be a pretty good go-to card for everything that you're gonna do, dining, bit of travel. A lot of people also end up downgrading that in the second year to a second Freedom Unlimited or Freedom Flex because you can, and then maybe they go to a different card and a different bonus. So there's a lot of play.
How did you get into the credit card game?
How did I get into the credit card game? I got very obsessed with it after she wanted to travel. And we did this last minute Japan trip, which was $1,200 for economy. And I just had a miserable time because it was like cramped and I felt like I was overpaying for it. And then I kind of just deep dived into this whole rabbit hole of credit card points and stuff. And it's like, oh, you can actually get a lot of value. I always thought it was a few percent back, so I didn't really care that much. But I think realizing how it can unlock experiences for me was interesting.
Similar question, how did you start making content like on YouTube and your website?
Yeah, so how did I start making YouTube content? I kind of just, and I can expand on this too, I kind of just did it. I was pretty much so obsessed with this that I was trying to convince our friends to sign up for stuff because it just made a lot of sense. And she was like, hey, can you shut the fuck up? Can you? It's like, hey, can you just record this and just send it to them? Because I think I was doing multiple phone calls where, sometimes when you talk to someone and you spend like 30 minutes like listing out the reasons why they should buy that MacBook, and then the next day they come back, they're like, hey, should I buy that MacBook? And you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's pretty much what happened.
To clarify, it was like unprompted. Every single lunch and dinner we would go to, we would just bring up the Chase Sapphire Reserve. Except no one asked.
No.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I can talk more. If you're trying to be a YouTuber, I can expand on that as well for tips and tricks and stuff.
Can I talk to you after this?
Yeah.
The credit card community, they say like having a 0% utilization rate on your credit card can actually like slow down your credit score progress. Is that actually true, or is it good to have like a 1% utilization rather than 0%?
So the question is a 0% utilization bad versus 1%? Generally, you want to still post something, so 1% is weirdly better. Otherwise, it looks like you're not using any credit, which is kind of weird as well. But I mean, that could just be $1, right? That doesn't, like you're not forcing yourself to pay interest. You could just put your coffee purchase and let it post on the statement, and you're good to go.
I'm not sure if the question I have has to do with the question that was just asked, but if my credit score has remained the same for the past like 3-4 months, is that because like I pay the balance up to 0 and then it just assumes that I haven't been using the card at all?
So the question is whether the score not changing is due to you paying off the card. I think it depends. It depends on the factors. If you have, are you using the card at all or not really?
Yeah, I use it a lot.
Use it a lot? So it might be that you're not prepaying it, so the balance that's posting looks higher than maybe you want it to be. So a lot of people, let's say if you have a card with $1,000 limit, and you use $500. That's not uncommon. What some people will do, they'll pay off $499 before the card is supposed to close in order to post with a $1 utilization, so it looks like 1%, so it looks a lot better. And then the other thing is that you could also not have enough cards. So that's another factor where some people just have one card and they're like, oh, you're not building on any of the other points, I guess.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Would you like recommend getting like a lot of cards? Like, would you say that having a lot of credit cards is like a bad thing? Because I personally have like a lot of credit cards, and then my friends have like a couple, and they're always like, oh, like that's bad because you're just paying a lot, so you're not making use of it. But I just feel like it's not a bad thing, so I just wanted to get your point of view.
I mean, the question was, are a lot of cards bad versus a few? I mean, I think it just depends on what hobby you want to pick, right? Like, there's people I know who have 7 keyboards, mechanical keyboards, because that's their jam, right? For me, like, credit cards is kind of this weird hobby where you actually get paid to play it, unlike a lot of the other, like headphones or something, where you're pretty much, the end goal is you purchasing something. A lot of cards doesn't really hurt. Like, there's a ton of people with 20, 30 cards. It's not really an issue. No. I think a lot of people will tell you that you're crazy, though, because, I mean, it's understandable. Like, you look like a crazy person, but not you specifically, just in general. But yeah, it's easy to look, for it to sound absurd.
Which credit cards did you start off with, and how many credit cards do you have now?
What credit card did I start off with, and how many credit cards do I have now? I started off with the Discover It, and then kind of moved into Chase. And then in terms of cards I have now, it's north of 40, but yeah. But it's kind of like a system, right? Like you don't, basically if you're very smart with it, you don't even have to check it that much. Like, everything can be optimized where you check it like once a week and you spend 5 minutes. It's like checking basketball score.
So what's like your all-time favorite place you've ever visited on points? And what place did you like expect to be really good, but then was like very disappointing?
So what's the best place we visited with points, and what's something that was overrated, basically? I thought the Maldives, I was expecting the Maldives to be overrated, but it's actually it's pretty good. Yeah, like, it's pretty much everything you'd expect. Like, it's actually what Instagram looks like. Yeah, as you would expect. Very expensive for pretty much everything, though. So, like, have money for food. And then especially if you want to drink, that's going to be very expensive. But yeah, super photogenic, clear water. I kind of want to go back now. In terms of overrated, I would say Santorini is something that people really like, and it's also like a very big Instagram one. But I think there were just a lot of tourists everywhere, and it was a bit much. But I think it looks beautiful. Like, it's a cool architecture, but it feels like they took Instagram and tried to like replicate it in a lot of ways. No.
So what would you recommend, like, for travel? What's the best travel credit card in your opinion, like the top 3?
What's the best travel card or the top 3? I think it depends on what you're optimizing for. Generally, it's going to be either Chase Sapphire, Reserve, Amex Platinum, Citi, Premier, Capital One, Venture X. A lot of people either cycle through them, so they'll try one and then go to the other one to see if they like it. So I think a lot of people get caught in this idea that you have to get the card and keep it, and oftentimes you can downgrade it. So think of it like dating, right? Like, you're not getting married to the first person you pick. You can like date around, see if you like it, and then maybe go back to the one that you actually really liked. Factually true.
It's being recorded, so.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of people Tinder around. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, so I know like a lot of us are like kind of starving college students that we don't really have that much money to spend, but we also want to experience like, a lot of cool trips. So is there any way that like we can like spend money, I don't know, like stores, so like basically get to use your card, but like without really spending your money, like legally.
So basically how to get points and get these bonuses and stuff without spending your own money. So there is kind of this whole little background community behind this that you can look into a lot more online. I would just recommend tuition and stuff being a pretty big one. Like if you can make tuition payments, rent payments, those are the simplest ones that like don't require a lot of time. Like there are other sub-communities where people flip things or buy gift cards and stuff, but I just don't think it's worth the effort. Like you have so many better other things to do. But yeah, there are some people who flip shoes. It's like, well, if I'm buying 10K in shoes because I'm trying to make 12K from it anyways, then why not put it on a card? Or if they're drop shipping or doing pretty much anything else.
For students that aren't spending that much and aren't earning that many points to be able to go to bathrooms, do you see cashback as a possibly more convenient alternative?
So for students who aren't spending that much, is cashback better than stuff like that? The multi-step stuff. I think it depends on you, right? Like it depends on your circumstances and what you're after. For me, $200 is still $200, right? Like that doesn't hurt. But I think it just depends on your position, like maybe where you're gonna be working after, or if you're interning somewhere. If you're interning at a FANG company, that the $200 doesn't sound as, it doesn't feel as big of a deal. But I definitely understand that like money's still money.
Just to answer the question like how do you get some money, to get some points, what I usually like to do is if I go out with a gathering of like 10 people to go out to eat dinner, I would offer to front the bill. And then they would pay me back through Venmo, which is a good way to get like big points. I guess my question is how do you find your aspirational trips? Do you usually are you usually like flexible, like as you find one you book it, or like would you target a specific one that you want to go to and just wait until that one is available?
So how do I find the aspirational trips and whether it's last minute or planned out? A lot of the places tend to be places she's trying to go and I just don't want to pay that much money out of pocket, which I'm guessing is from Instagram. So in terms of finding availability and stuff, I think that's the big thing. So you have to be pretty flexible. I think it's really hard if you're like, I want to go during Christmas because that's when everyone else wants to go. That's when the people who have the money, who are paying the stupid amount of money, are going. So you do have to be a bit flexible, but you don't want to go during rainy season either. So generally, I would look at the shoulder seasons for each place. So that's kind of the time that's before the peak season, but still reasonable for availability. And then just be flexible, like have like a 1 or 2 week period where you can look for stuff for either flights or hotels. Yeah.
I have a quick question on membership fees. What is your perception on, I mean, some of them are reasonable, I guess, in respect to like my wallet, but like in terms of like, I guess, higher cost membership fees, like what are your thoughts? Like what do you recommend?
Yeah. So what are my thoughts on annual fees? I think it depends on your circumstances. So the platinum, for example, sounds really absurd at $695, but it has like $1,400 in credits. So my question would be, would you have normally reasonably used those $1,400? So if you're someone already going to Equinox, if you're already doing pretty much, there's like a checklist of things, then great, you're kind of already using the credits anyways, and you might be coming out ahead from having the card. But if you're not using the credits, then I think it just depends on if you get value from the card. So there are some people who only use maybe half the credits, or maybe use only, let's say, $500 in credits. But for them, they're like, well, $300 is still worth it because they're a consultant and they fly every week, and that's an open bar for them. Yeah.
Do you stay under 524?
Do I stay under 524? So 524 is this rule that means you can't get certain cards if you have more than 5 or more new cards in the last 24 months. I'm under it now, but I basically blew past it, and then I pretty much got every Amex card at some point, yeah. And then now I'm under, so.
What are your thoughts on the debit credit card mixes? Like, you know how there are some companies, like there's something called the first card?
Yeah.
I believe, what are your thoughts on that?
So what are my thoughts on the debit and credit card mixes? I think they're fine. I think there's actually a lot of solutions that are trying to help people build credit without it being credit. I think it's going to be a very interesting time because a lot of it's marketing, right? And like I think early on it makes sense, but at some point, if the card is paying you only 1% and you have a credit card option that's paying you 2%, even then it kind of becomes like, well, am I getting the most value, right? And the funny thing is I'm actually invested in a lot of these debit cards, like as an angel investor. So like I'm bullish on it because I think there is still a trend against credit, but it just depends on if the perspective changes.
I'm so sorry, I am late and not sure if you covered this topic, but what are your opinions on credit card churning?
So what are my opinions on credit card churning? I think, I mean, it depends on how you viewed my talk, but I think it's fine-ish. It depends on you and whether it's worth your time. Like for a lot of people, I think it's maybe picking 3 cards and moving on with your life because you have other things to do. That's totally fine. It just depends on what you want your hobbies to be, what you're prioritizing for the most part. Like there's some people I know who are into like side hustle stuff, so they like make videos or research on that. Some people are into keyboards or into like photography. Yeah.
So I have 2 questions. The first question is, do you recommend that everybody has, in addition to the traditional revolving credit, like a charge card for emergencies, whatnot? And the second part of my question is, what do you see long-term in terms of credit cards? Do you see any type of trends, any type of like developments? So I'd like to hear your input on that.
So question number 1 was whether you need a charge card in addition to a credit card, and number 2 is the long-term trends. So charge cards, in case you don't know, are pretty much like no-limit cards, but on the back end, there oftentimes still is a limit based off your income, based off the data that they can gather on you. I think it's fine, but I wouldn't really bother. I think for a lot of people, your first card is probably going to be $500 credit limit. Next one might be like 2,000 or 3,000, and then at a certain point, once they can trust you, especially if you have a decent income, like the third card might be like a 20,000 credit limit because, yeah, they're like, okay, cool, you're relatively safe. Long term, I think it's going to be still around, if that's the question. I think there are a lot of government. So the question is whether the government clamps down and like removes interchange fees or lowers it, because as long as the banks can make money on the interchange, that's kind of what this is all about, right? Like a lot of the cards, like the Platinum, the idea is that you don't keep a balance. The idea is that you pay it off in full. So they're not making any interest on you. They're just making money from you using the card. So I think as long as Amex can still make money, then they'll happily pay you out the points.
So given the recent devaluations of Hyatt, Hilton, and Marriott, what do you think the future of hotel points currency is? Like, is there going to be kind of a trend in the better direction in the future, or do you think it's going to keep just going down more and more in value?
So the question is whether the devaluation in these hotel points end up being a long-term trend or whether it's problematic or not. So I think Hyatt's devaluation is relatively reasonable. The other ones have been pretty aggressive. I think I think at some point there is going to be a pullback and it's going to flip again. Like just one of them are going to be like, okay, never mind, we changed our mind and switch it back up, but could be wrong.
What's your favorite credit card that you use out of?
In terms of using, probably the gold card, just because Forex back on food is pretty good and supermarkets. In terms of lounge access stuff, probably the Platinum still, because like Centurion Lounge is nice in SFO, and also you can get into Delta Sky clubs with it, so it's pretty good.
So do you feel like your spending habits has changed since you got into the credit card game? Like has it been like slowly slow, or have you
The question was, do I think my credit card habits have changed my spending habits have changed due to having credit cards? Not really, because I'm still pretty cheap in a lot of ways. Again, like at Chipotle, I don't order the guac. It's not like I'm like, oh, great, I'm getting extra points. I think it depends on you. Some people it definitely does, but as long as you're like, just treat it like debit. I think that's the best way, right? Like, and then for a lot of people now, traditionally, a lot of people were like, well, if you use physical cash, you feel the pain a lot more because you're departing with it. But I feel like in today's age, and like most people I know, like I don't really care about cash. I care about the balance on my phone more than anything. And I still see that going down when I use credit or debit. It doesn't make a difference. Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on points versus cash back? Like they have the Chase Sapphire Preferred, which is more about like, you know, X amount of points back versus like the Chase Unlimited, which is like 5% cash back on certain purchases.
So my thoughts on points versus cash back. So ironically, if you actually look at the terms for the unlimited, it's actually points as well. They market it as cash back because the demo that are considering that card are scared by points, but it's points as well. And you can transfer it between the cards. I think points offer you a lot more upside, and a lot of them still have the same downside benefit. So like 5x is still 5% at a bare minimum. But you have the potential of doing the other aspirational stuff, but you don't have to. That's the thing. It just depends on the currency. So Amex, for example, is pretty bad for cash out, but they're pretty good for aspirational stuff. Chase is pretty good for both.
How do you manage your cards? Like you have 40 plus cards, so how do you keep at least one transaction every month for each card maybe?
Yeah.
And you have to pay them all the time?
Yeah.
Or you're traded like, oh, this is my job, I'll be doing that every day, like spend a lot of time to manage it.
How do I manage my cards? I don't use every single month. As long as you have one being posted to your credit, that's all it really needs. So for your credit report, it's kind of like they just want to see some activity. And yeah, there's cards that I stock drawer, so I don't really use, and maybe use once a year to keep it active. So for most cards, as long as you use it once a year, they don't care. In terms of managing everything, I would just change all the statement dates to the same date. That way all the due dates are exactly the same. So like all my Chase cards have to be paid on the 26th of the month, every month. That way I'm not like looking at it every day. I can look at it once a week or once every 2 weeks or something. Yeah. And then I just kind of line it up so I have like 2 different close dates a month.
Through American Express, do you think it's more worth it to like wait around for like promotional and transfer partners, like where you get like 1 to 2?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Like through American Express, like do you think it's worth it, like waiting around for like a promotional offer where you can get like 1 to 2 points like through the transfer partner, or like I really wanted to take a trip to just take a one-on-one conversion?
So for American Express, whether it makes sense to wait for promotions. So American Express oftentimes has these promotions where you get like double or like 1.3x the value. I think it generally does unless you need to do that trip. Like obviously if you're like, hey, I want to fly to wherever next week and this saves me a ton of money, then yeah, go for it, right? But if not, I would wait.
How do you get like hotel statuses like that have like a lot of good perks, or like just like what I don't know status do you recommend us to like try to get?
What status would I recommend trying to get?
Status, like just like worth it.
And is hotel status worth it? I think airline status isn't really, like airline status, you need to either spend a crap ton of money or you need to actually fly a lot to get it. For hotel status, a lot of cards give it to you. It just depends on whether it's worth it for you. I think the Hilton one is the most interesting one because Hilton Aspire gets you diamond status and that gets you upgrades to like suites and stuff and free breakfast and everything else you'd expect around that.
So let's give you a hypothetical scenario. Let's say somebody has a gold card, they've called for a retention offer, they're not getting anything substantial, and they have points sitting in their account. What would be your advice for this person if they want to close their account, they want to pay the annual fee, what would you do in this case?
So if you have the gold card, you called for retention and they're not giving it to you. So for people new, retention is pretty much you calling and telling them that you want to cancel and them giving you points to stick around. So oftentimes in the second year, you can call them and that works out. It's the same with Comcast or anything else. If you don't get a retention offer, I'd probably just apply for another card that has MR points. That way you can like protect the points and you don't lose them. and that's fine. So whether that's the green would be a good next one, everyday preferred, platinum, pretty good options, yeah.
Have you ever received a shutdown from any of the major issuers?
Have I gotten shut down from any of the issuers? I don't know why I'm thinking about this. No, but an airline did get mad at me. So American Airlines has gotten mad at me because I opened a lot of cards and then they shut down a lot of people's American Airlines accounts. So American Airlines allowed you to, I'm not even sure if I should be talking about this. American Airlines allowed you to apply for their City Platinum card, American Airlines Platinum card multiple times, as long as you got mailers for it. And yeah, people applied for a new one every month because for each, American Airlines is just very, very, very good for first class. So people were flying Cathay Pacific every month due to this, yeah. It doesn't exist anymore, yeah, like the strategy's not working, yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a personal preference for using a specific bank for paying off your credit cards? Like, I do know like on YouTube we talk a lot about Charles Schwab. There's one like a checking account or Bank of America, but I hear a lot of people are disappointed and do not really like Bank of America. Do you have like a specific preference of Chase? Any specific one?
So do I have any preference on banks? I like Chase because they're pretty convenient, and also I feel like they're easier. Every time I've been to a Chase, it's generally pretty straightforward. Bank of America, like always something crazy happens for some reason. I don't know why. So yeah, I don't like Bank of America as much as Chase. I mean, Chase is like a solid one. Schwab is fine for online, but they don't have in person, so sometimes that's problematic. I think having the Schwab one makes a lot of sense though. It's like a very good backup account. Another really cool perk about the Schwab one is that you can actually do withdrawals and there's no fee. So when we go to like Asia or where, like if we're going to Bangkok or something, we're withdrawing from an ATM, we'll use the Schwab card because there's no fees, and then we just leave a relatively small amount of money in there. That way, if it does get like hacked or something crazy happens, I'm not like getting hit on my main account, it's on my like side account.
So credit cards is step one in kind of like personal finance knowledge. What are some other things that you learn?
I would say credit card. So the question was, if credit cards is step one, what are some other things that you should learn about? I would say that credit cards is generally not step one. A lot of the times it's even just like basic budgeting. So as long as you have that down, you're pretty good. Step two is probably like investing into like ETFs. So like that's pretty standard. Try to save like 50% of what you make. Your take home is what I generally recommend. So yeah, as long as you're pretty good with that, then I would say credit cards is like number three, because then that opens up travel and then people start doing that a bit more. And then number four would probably be like more advanced investing stuff. And you go down a pretty big rabbit hole on each one.
So as your experience as like a personal finance, YouTube guru, I'm just curious, like meeting other people within that realm, what are some of the coolest things that you've learned that, up to your financial game?
So the question is, what cool things I learned from other personal...
From the community. Yeah, like from the community or other gurus like within your space.
So what have I learned from other gurus? I don't think most of us like to be called gurus. I think that's like a very scammy term, generally. Yeah, sure, influencers. What have I learned? I think I've learned that a lot of people are into very cool things and they're experts in a lot of cool things, and I think there's like a lot of knowledge to be shared. So like drop shipping, yeah, like some people are just very into drop shipping and like they make a lot of money doing it, but it's something that's not worth my time. And yeah, in terms of other things, I think the biggest takeaway is a lot of people are kind of, I think a lot of people put people up on a pedestal and they're relatively normal people. Like they're down to, like even if you talk to like Graham Stephan, he's pretty chill and down to earth. Like all these other big like YouTubers that are like $1 million to like 3 mil range, they're just normal people. It's literally like if you went home tonight and decided to talk to a camera about whatever you care about. Like it could be basketball, it could be NFTs or something, like whatever you care about, and you just kept doing it every day for like 3-4 years. It's kind of what happened.
Yeah, I have two questions. So the first one is that like, how long did it take you to like get like the 40-ish like credit card? Like, how often did you apply? And then the second question is like, what are your thoughts on the centurion card? Like, if would you like if you get invited, or like I don't know if you have it already, but like what are your thoughts on the crazy one?
So how did I get, what was the timing for getting all the cards, and also my thoughts on the centurion card? Timing was over like 5 years, so it's been a pretty, like there were some months where I was a lot more aggressive. I think it's been a lot slower now because like I'm pretty much out of bonuses to apply for. So I'm kind of like in this waiting game for a lot of them for the clocks because some of them are 24 months or 48 months. In terms of the centurion card, I think if you get value from it, that's fine. But I think a lot of people see it as something to aspire towards, and I don't really agree, just because it's not really, the thing is, it's not really about net worth or about like how much money you make for that card. It's about how much money you spend. So for San Francisco, you have to put about $500 to $1 million per year on the card for 2 consecutive years to get it. So if you do that anyways, great. And it kind of like does a lot of status symbol-y stuff, but beyond that, I don't think it's really worth it. Like a concierge, you could probably hire a virtual assistant to do it for substantially cheaper, right? Like I'm not sure. And then talking to people who have the card, it's like the value prop is not as much as you might think it is. There's a lot of mystique to it, and I get it, but yeah.
What's been the best upgrade you've received due to your hotel status?
Due to my hotel status, if we can pull up Instagram, we went to a place in Asia called Koh Samui. We got upgraded from a normal room into this 3-bedroom suite with a gigantic pool. That was like absurd because I think it was actually meant for like 6 people or 8 people. Yeah. And that was just from having diamond status from having a card, and I didn't really even do anything with it. So like the American Express Hilton Aspire card gives you diamond status just by virtue of you having the card and paying the $450. And yeah, it unlocks pretty crazy upgrades in Asia. Do I edit my own videos? For a long time, I did, because I think I'm very like anal and particular about things. I only recently, in the last like 2 months, found an editor because like I just have too many other things to do. But even then, I think a lot of people think editing is not as bad as, or it's not too bad. So I can tell you that for a lot of content creators, if they're writing a script, that might be like 1 hour. Filming might be 30 minutes to 1 hour, depending on them and like how good they are at it. And then for a lot of people, editing can easily be 4 hours. So for me, the editor is taking like 3 hours of that, and maybe I'm doing like 1 hour of like spot checking and and changing certain things that I don't like. But yeah, I think editing is probably the hardest part of YouTube. A lot of people see the final product; they don't see like the work in progress part of it. So the question is, becoming an influencer, did I have a game plan going into it, or did I just kind of wing it? I think I winged it for the most part for the beginning. I knew that there was interest in it, and I think getting that initial feedback helps to see that there is interest in what you're talking about. I've seen some people literally grind out content for like a year and like get no traction, and obviously there's something going wrong there. So I think you can kind of meld both of them together to see what makes sense. But yeah, it's like finding a niche and like finding a strategy to like do well on it. But yeah, I can talk offline about that too.
Now that everything is transitioning towards more bite-sized media, so YouTube Shorts, TikTok, do do you see YouTube in the way that it is right now still being around in the next 5 to 10 years? And if not, are you transitioning more towards the bite-sized media?
So the question is whether bite-sized media is a concern for YouTubers. I would say generally not really, because it's really hard to like get enough information through in like 10 to 60 seconds even. And even if you look at TikTok, they are testing long form content as well. I think it's a lot easier to grow with bite-sized stuff, but I feel like it's also like more clickbaity and just oftentimes more wrong and not as detailed. I think you can grow really fast doing that if you want to do that, but if you're trying to build an audience, I think YouTube still makes more sense. And that's why sometimes you'll see TikTokers who have like millions of followers who are like, hey, go check out my YouTube where I do longer versions of this. And their YouTube channel has like a few hundred followers or subscribers. So the analogy that I like to use is that TikTok is pretty much when you go into a restaurant and you're walking by a bunch of people, you see them, but you're not necessarily, you don't have a vested interest. While YouTube, you're intentionally going and sitting down and having dinner with them for that 10 minutes. So I think it just depends on what you value, but if you're trying to grow really fast, TikTok is still the way, and Shorts is the way.
What are 3 books that you would recommend to kind of like level out, or you kind of like based or started with to kind of start your education journey in like finance and financial literacy?
What are 3 books for that I'd recommend for financial literacy? I didn't read any of these books, so like my background is finance, so there was nothing I read. I think thinking wise, like Peter Thiel 0 to 1 is pretty good. A lot of startup books, because that's also kind of my background. But yeah, but I'm not really one of those like book guru people that are like, oh, you need to read these 3 books. Have you seen my shelf? My knowledge, my shelf of all these cars, my Lamborghini. Yeah.
More about experience than reading.
Yeah. I mean, end of the day, it's kind of about knowing yourself. Like a lot of it is just, you already kind of know what to do in terms of investing and stuff. Like you know you just need to invest and just like do it consistently. It's kind of like going to the gym. Like you have an idea of, for the most part. What advice would I give to myself as a student or in my 20s? Probably to not do the corporate path in the short term. So I did that for like a few years before doing startup stuff. And maybe this is terrible advice for people in this room, but for me, I think there's a lot more opportunity outside of like traditional like investment banking, consulting, and even like FANG in terms of whether it's content creation, whether it's starting a company, whether it's something else. So I think that's one trap that a lot of people fall into. And yeah, just try new things, like put yourself out there. Probably make content today in today's world, because that's such a low hanging bar. And I think people oftentimes get surprised by like, oh, I didn't think this would go anywhere. And I'm suddenly now like this million subbed or million followered TikToker talking about personal finance. Like that's what I meant by like a lot of the other personal finance gurus, they were just normal people who decided to turn on a camera. Like Graham's like a real estate guy who just turned on a camera. Someone else is like an accountant who's like, oh, let me just talk about these basic things I already learned through school that other people might not know. So whatever you're studying, you can probably talk about it and you probably built an audience.
So I'm just curious, like in terms of like taxes, how does this work for points, redemption, and just like credit cards as a whole? Like, is there any like tax-related things we should know, or it's just non-taxable?
So for tax and points, points count as rebates, so there are no tax consequences. In terms of redemption, sometimes you have to pay taxes for like fuel surcharges and stuff, but for the most part, they're pretty minimal, like maybe a few $100. Okay. Last chance? Okay.
So you went to the Chase Center yesterday. Was that like, like using like the points you earned, or like?
No, that has nothing to do with my credit card stuff. That's like my NFT side. That's like my yeah. That's because I have collected too many NFTs for the basketball one. Yeah, the separate channel. Okay. I have a lot of Top Shot, which is probably a mistake at this point. Debating a mutant ape, and then I have a few other, a lot of the personal finance people I know have like recently aped into Bored Apes, just for the like network effects and like getting entry into events. Because I think some people are like very skeptical of NFTs, and I get it. But if you think about like the country clubs, all these other like secret society type things, it kind of makes sense that one should exist in like today's world. And if you're someone like Eminem, you probably don't want to talk to normal poor people. It's like, okay, how do I connect with other like industry leaders of sorts?
No one else's question. I think we're kind of to an end, so I wanted to ask you, for example, I'm so sorry I was late, but what is one key takeaway you would like for us all to kind of absorb and really, really take away about credit cards or just personal finance before you kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, so what's the key takeaway I would have for people attending? I think the main thing is to take what you already do, either at night or on weekends, and either make content behind it or figure out how to like stack that up into more opportunities. Like if you're someone who's already into flipping things, okay, credit cards are a pretty reasonable extension because you can get points from that. But also like, can you build a startup around this? Can you build a service around it? How do you automate it? How do you think more critically to scale it up? Like the reason I like credit cards is that relatively speaking, it scales pretty easily. If you're someone who's already on Twitter and you're like into all these NFT talks, you're in Discord, you're reading all the stuff, you probably are substantially more educated than other people. If you're someone who's like in the startup world, it's like, if you're talking to all these companies, maybe start angel investing, maybe start a fund if you start having some success. Like, yeah, just basically take what you already do, what you're very interested and passionate about, and see how you can lever it. Cool, I think that's it. So thank you guys.
So yeah, thank you all for showing up. Next week, we will have Emmanuel, the founder of Card Pointers, as a guest speaker. So please check the Discord for the Intro to Credit Cards DeCal if you would like to attend that. So if you are not enrolled in the course website can all be found at creditcal.org. So just the word credit and then cal, like Berkeley Cal.org. And the Discord will be there. You can join the Discord. You can access all the content, all the recorded lectures, everything we've done so far. All for free online on YouTube. So yeah, thank you all for showing up. Hopefully I'll see you next week.